Yeah. Thank you very much, Hannes. Thank you very much, Imad and Gadi, for coming. Fatemeh wrote to me she has class and she comes around 5:30. So we will start with Imad. Imad, do you want to show any kind of images, or you want to talk without any images?
I will just speak.
Okay, then the word is yours. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Sonia. Thank you, Hannes, and everybody else who took her time to be here today. Yeah, so maybe before I really start, maybe two more sentences about Medico and about the PGA, the Association of Palestinian Jewish Academics. Medico is a German NGO, which has been there for 60 years almost here in Frankfurt. And Medico is working in Lebanon, has been working in Lebanon for the past 40 years at least. And Medico's approach is usually not charity, but solidarity. So we do not work on a project-based order, but more we have partner organizations in Lebanon, Lebanese actors from civil society who have been our partners for some of them 20 years, some of them 30 or 40 years. So a firm connection between Medico and the work in Lebanon. So for one, just as a context, and before I really start about Lebanon, and the second point is I'm here as, so to say, delegate of PGA. Sonia asked if one of us from the Palestinian Jewish Academics would like to join. We are an association which has been founded during 2024, so quite new. And we are scholars who are based in Germany from a Palestinian or Jewish background. And well, our aim is to tackle the narratives and the Staatsräson reason of state that is at play here and tries to really silence dissenting voices on Palestine, Israel. So, and I'm very happy to be here today. So now on Lebanon. I have been in Lebanon. I came back this Sunday, so it's been only 3 days. I'm back. I have been there with two colleagues. We've stayed there for 5 days. We arrived last Tuesday, so the night before the heavy bombardments of the country, which took place on 2 p.m. local time without prior warning at all. We were in the middle of Beirut when I'm sorry if I start with bombardments, but this is maybe one of the most pressing issues right now, I'd say, because here I have the feeling that it's really not on. Well, when I follow media, I don't see that. I don't see an outcry on what happened on last Wednesday because we were in the middle of Beirut, in the center of Beirut, and all of a sudden it started raining bombs on us, and it was in a time span of 10 minutes or so that 160 bombs were dropped, and many civilian targets were hit, really central places. In the middle of Beirut, outside so-called strongholds of Hizb were targeted. Also, you all know in Saida and the rest of the south of Lebanon and also in the Bekaa. Almost 400 people were murdered in the span of 10 minutes, and approximately, we don't have the exact numbers yet because there's still people missing, and but roughly 400 people killed and 1,200 people injured. So it was a disaster. People in Lebanon are calling it the Black Wednesday already. It was one of the heaviest bombardments the city ever experienced. People started to talk about 1982, the Israeli invasion into south of Lebanon, into Beirut, and they say, well, the older ones at least who still remember the summer of '82, well, that's their comparison actually. they say it was much worse than 2006, which was bad enough for the country. The humanitarian situation in Lebanon is really dire. I've been traveling to Lebanon with Medico for the past 3 years, twice a year, but I know the country from before, and I have never seen Lebanon in such a disastrous state as I have seen in this past week. A lot is just missing. The public health sector is really strained. It's a mix of public hospitals and private hospitals. Many NGOs are taking over things the state would usually do, but since the state is broke and corrupt, so NGOs step in. And again, last Wednesday, the ERs and the hospitals were so overwhelmed with people. They could barely handle it, and they used materials in the hospitals which usually would suffice for a whole month. And before the aggression started on Lebanon, beginning of March, the stockpiles were prepared for 2 to 3 months, maybe 4 months. So 1 month is gone in one day, and because of the wider escalation on the Persian Gulf between the US and Israel on one hand and Iran on the other hand, there's not much coming into the country in terms of humanitarian help, because United Nations institutions like World Food Program and World Health Organization, they have their warehouses in Dubai. So it's really difficult to get new stuff in. We have approximately 1.1 million internally displaced people. It's a small country, 5 point something population, so it's roughly 20% of the population is on the move, internally displaced for now, the 7th week ongoing. Just today, the Israeli army public new displacement orders. Everybody south of the Zahrani River, which is way into the country, has to move north or risks being killed, targeted by the Israeli occupation. So this is where we stand today. Maybe a few more words on the impact of the humanitarian catastrophe on different sectors of Lebanese society. So we have approximately 600 plus shelters in the country. They're usually in public buildings like schools and universities. They can give shelter only to roughly 15% of all the displaced people in the country. So this means we're talking about something like 900,000 to 1 million people who have no space in an official shelter. So they have to see for themselves, either in a tent somewhere, many people in their cars, some, at beaches. Many try to rent flats, apartments in Beirut and other cities up to Tarablis, Tripoli. We have been in Beirut, then we went up north to Tripoli, and we went down south to Ain al-Hilwa camp, Palestinian refugee camp, close to Saida, and we've been also inside Saida to see how the situation is there, to make an assessment. We also visited schools in Saida, in Tripoli, which are shelters now, and we have been to one of the campuses of the Lebanese University, which is now also a public shelter for refugees and internally displaced people. This means that the education system is stalled for 7 weeks now. For the first 2 weeks, all schools were closed, or they were being transferred or transformed into shelters. So no schooling for the kids. After 2 weeks, there is still schools open now, but in order to get every kid to school, they're working in shifts now, teachers. Like, you have a morning shift and you have an afternoon shift for the kids, and they don't do the whole curriculum because it's just impossible with like in 2 shifts. So they reduce the curriculum, in order to be able to finish the school year, which finishes in roughly 6 weeks, 1st of June. So it's really a bad and dire situation, and we all remember this has been going on since October 23. So for the kids, it's always, and especially in the south of the country, it's like an intermittent opening and closing of schools. The same goes for universities right now. Those who opened up as public shelters, there's online teaching. We all know this, remember this from the COVID period. And this is how they try to handle the situation. So it's really not easy. And maybe a few more words, and then I'm going to finish on the political situation in Lebanon. I've never seen Lebanon or Lebanese people being so worried of internal civil strife. Those who know the country and those who know its history know it's like a taboo topic. It's really bad topic. We had the civil war from 75 to 1990, and many partners of us who know the country very well, who are involved in political discussions and so forth, they say it's really bad. Like, we have for the first time in ages that in social media, people, members of the different sects, really use language against other sects that you normally you wouldn't do that, like just like bad language. They curse each other, they swear at each other. So this is one point, and this is due to the fact that nobody can give you a real number here. There's no poll saying, well, X% in the country are pro-Hizb and X% are anti-Hizb or whatever. But it's quite polarized in the sense that for the first time, maybe in decades, we have a visible and audible fraction of Lebanese society, which is quite, how do you say, quite, well, they're not afraid anymore to speak out against Hizb, I would say. And we had the change in the government with Aoun and Nawaf Salam, who, for those who support Hizb, they are just, traitors. For them, it's just inconceivable to meet with Israel or to talk to Israel. The meeting yesterday, I think, yeah, it was yesterday in Washington between the two ambassadors of Lebanon and Israel. Many observers and many people in Lebanon really disliked it. On the other hand, those who are in favor of disarming Hizb, they see it as a chance to get rid of Hizb and to get rid of the endless wars. But nobody actually can give you an answer on the question how the Lebanese government, which has no leverage, neither against Israel or Hizb, how the Lebanese government will manage to disarm Hizb without risking a wider, maybe armed conflict internally. So this is the state of Lebanon right now. I have seen at least some reassuring signs from both sides, like the General Secretary of Hezbollah appeared on TV 2 nights ago, and he appeased his crowd a bit. At the same time, Nawaf Salam, who was scheduled to travel himself to the US to meet with Israeli officials, said, no, I'm not going to do it. He sent the ambassador in the United States. So there is at least some signs that give you hope that the political actors inside Lebanon will come to some sort of consensus on how to deal with the situation. But the south of the country is somehow, I have the feeling, sometimes taken out of the equation. It seems that Israel is refraining from bombarding Beirut since last Wednesday. That was the last bombardment of Beirut. But the situation in the south is really catastrophic. We have communities which are completely destroyed. Kfar Kila, Bint Jbeil, Khiyam, Ait al-Shab, 95% destruction. There's satellite imagery, and we have the Gaza scenario all over again. Scorched earth tactics into Lebanon, a fact I think which is not so widely known, at least not in Germany. Israel has been using recently, in the recent weeks and months, high concentrated glyphosate, that's a total herbicide, in the south of Lebanon in order to really kill any vegetation down south. So Lebanese scientists have taken, samples from the south of Lebanon, sent it to labs, and it's really high concentrated glyphosate, which is really, just toxic. And so it's really looking bad. And it's really not clear how the situation in the south will proceed from here. It seems to us that the ceasefire between US and Israel and Iran is somehow holding. Maybe it will be extended. Iran first insisted Lebanon to be included in the ceasefire. The South is not included, as we all know, and it gets worse by the day. And I don't see that Iran would risk a break of the ceasefire for the south of Lebanon, at least not in the short term. We'll see. So far from me, and excuse me for taking so long of your time.
Thank you, Imad. So my proposal would be, Gadi, you immediately follow up, and then we do a Q&A and look whether Fatemeh arrived, and then discuss Iran with her.
Professor Shams is already with us, so perhaps she could speak now.
Fatemeh, I can't see you. Wonderful. I'm very grateful you are here. So let's do that, Fatemeh. If you want to talk now, then please go ahead.
Sure, thank you. I'll try to be brief. There is nothing really positive to share at this point. I think the entire region, and I'm talking about Palestine, Lebanon, Iran, everywhere is just facing a form and level of destruction that is unprecedented in the past few decades. The case of Iran in particular, if I want to highlight a few urgent matters, first, just to give you an idea what has happened is that unlike the ridiculous claims being made by Trump administration that there has been a regime change in Iran, what has essentially unfolded on the ground is a transition from a religious dictatorship to a military/religious dictatorship, which is much more radical, much more fanatic on the ground. The level of the level of internal pressure and persecution on the protesters that were arrested in the January protests has intensified. Unfortunately, the executions are taking place on a daily and on a weekly basis. Only in the past 2 weeks, a dozen of protesters have been executed, and the age range for these prisoners who have been executed is somewhere between 18 to 25. And you can tell from the age group that these are basically the generation that were born after the 2000s. In the post-reform period, I belong to the period of Green Movement. When I was 26, the Green Movement in 2009 happened. These were children. These were toddlers and children. Some of them were not even born at that time. So for me, it's extremely difficult to fathom and to to really just cope with the fact that what has gone wrong over the past 16 years, that the pressure has only intensified on the civilians inside the country. I have said this repeatedly in different interviews over the past 2 months, and I say it here again, that yes, we are facing and have faced external aggression and assault on Iran at least twice over the past year. One is the 12 days war in June last year, and the recent war that is, that can break out at any moment. But there is an ongoing internal war against the civilians and citizens of the country that has been going on for much longer. And I use the word war because what we see on the ground is a combination of military actions against the citizens, particularly the Kurdish citizens, the Baluchi citizens, and also, bringing live ammunitions and shooting the protesters in the head, directly in the head, in the eye, and in vital organs. That happened at least twice over the past 3 years. One during Women Life Freedom movement, that the government cracked down on the protesters with live ammunition, and one during the January massacre that killed thousands of people. According to the government itself, the numbers exceed 3,700. According to independent human rights organizations, more than 7,500 people have been killed in less than 24 hours. And more than 17,000 cases have been under investigation ever since. So the level of atrocities that the Islamic regime has committed over the past, since January, basically, so far, is unprecedented in its own history. That has brought a level of despair and utter desperation upon the population that have already was facing extreme economic pressure and lack of employment as a result of mismanagement and corruption within the government, but also as a result of intensifying sanctions, especially after the 12 days war. So the country and the population was already on the brink of collapse and real struggle to meet the ends meet on a daily basis when the Bazaris took to the streets and sparked peaceful protests that lasted for about 10 days before the son of the previous king of Iran issues a call on 8th and 9th of on 8th and 9th of January, 18th and 19th of day in Iranian calendar, for people to join the protests. The protests became much more violent. The reason for that was because he called on protesters to stay in the streets so that the protesters who used to go back home within the first 10 days after the sunset, a lot of them, especially the younger generation, they stayed in the streets. And they were met by bullets and guns, unfortunately. And scenes that came out of Iran between January to the beginning of February were so horrific that the entire population, even the government itself, was shaken by the level of atrocities that were committed. So that was where the Iranian society was before the beginning of the war. And I would like to mention something, because I see that this kind of misperception goes around a lot these days, that how on earth a population will ask for military intervention as the only way forward, or why did Iranians think that a war particularly by aggressors such as Israel with a record of genocide in the recent years, why did they think Netanyahu will save them? Well, I'm a social historian. My work is mostly on literature and cultural production, but I can tell you, as someone who was born in 1983, and was raised and educated up to the end of my bachelor's degree in Iran, I can tell you that this is the result of years and years of constant oppression from within, and essentially killing every single rare opportunity that the Iranians had since 2009 to November 2019 to September 2022 and to January 2025 to seek their rights, their civil rights, their basic human rights through peaceful means, through electoral system, through peaceful protests, through asking very peacefully and not in nonviolent modes for their bodily autonomy in 2022. And every single time they were brutally crushed. Their protests were crushed, and every time they faced execution and were brought to forced confessions, kidnapping, tortures. And, I come from a background where I had immediate family members who were kidnapped, who were tortured, who were imprisoned. I have been living in exile for 16 years myself, receiving death threats, kidnapping threats from IRGC. So this is not a normal situation. When someone from the West or a European country from a privileged background comes and say, or judge the people, in fact, people that have been brutally oppressed for almost half a century now. Sorry, my cats are fighting. You can't really expect them to be quote unquote normal, or to think within a democratic kind of mindset, that to think about, in fact, they were thinking about within a democratic mindset, but that they were brutally suppressed, not once, multiple times. And this is, what we're facing today is the direct consequence of, and I believe what we're facing also in Lebanon is the direct consequence of the expansionist and ideological policies of the Islamic Republic. Yes, US and Israel are aggressors in this case. Yes, this is an illegal war, but I think I always hear this over and over again from my friends and family in Iran, that this is a very simple question. Why can't we have a normal government? It's a very good question. And for them, normal government doesn't mean, a Swiss government. For them, it means to be able to walk into the street without being harassed, to vote and for their votes to be counted, to have a minimum economic security and safety where they can bring bread on the table, to go to protest and not being shot in the head and in the forehead and in the eyes, so or to be raped in prisons, in fact. When you bring a population to this level of despair, then it is legitimate when they ask what other options we are left with. I see that a lot of critics nowadays are blaming the entire population for actually saying, why did you even think that the alternative would be war? People didn't think the alternative would be war. People didn't have an alternative to begin with. And when you bring the country to this level of desperation and despair, then regional politics get on the way, and of course Israel is seeking its own national interests in the region, its own expansionist interests in the region. U.S. is, seeking its own interests. And when you have a very problematic opposition figure like Reza Pahlavi, who just jumps on every opportunity and hijacks the entire civil movement. Again, this hasn't happened only once. It happened in 2009, it happened in 2019, 2022, and again in 2025. And in the absence of free media, in the presence of near total digital blackout that still continues to this moment, and it's a crime against humanity in its own right, because people are losing their jobs. This is a society that is torn by war and by massacre, and now, due to the lack of internet, people are losing their small businesses, and these are the younger generation in the country. VPN sellers are being persecuted and arrested on charges of spying for Israel and for US. Families, it's still impossible after almost 50 days to reach out from outside to inside the country. International calls cannot be made. People are paying a ransom in order to get a package, in order to be able to call, like my own mother, for example. She can only call every week for 5 minutes because it's too expensive. People can't afford. People are literally running out of money to buy configs and VPNs, and so you're taking, this is a government that has taken 96 million people hostage, and as much as I would like to only look at this situation in a simple binary way to say that Iran is the victim and Israel and US are the aggressors, I'm sorry, but this is a situation that was created both ways. If the Islamic Republic didn't expand its aggression through proxy wars to the region, if it didn't commit so much crime against its own population through different means, then perhaps US and Israel would not find the opportunity or the justification of human rights, that they don't care at all. We know all that US and Israel, out of all other countries, have no respect or consideration for any human rights when it comes to other countries, of course. Then they will jump on it, and they use that as an opportunity to come and free and liberate the people of Iran by killing and the total destruction of the infrastructures and cultural sites. So it's a catastrophe we are facing. In terms of the current negotiations, it's such an irony, I think, for the supporters of the regime and for the officials themselves, that they're essentially in negotiation with the killers of their Ayatollah. And if you have been following Khamenei's lectures and speeches over the past 37 years that he was in power, he has repeatedly called any form of negotiation or direct engagement with US as a form of treason. I was actually listening to one of his lectures last night, and I was thinking that how little he knew that one of the guys that he appointed before his assassination was Mohammad Baqir Ghalibaf, one of the most trusted men of his office. And I don't think he ever thought that Ghalibaf would change his military uniform overnight and wear a suit and jumps on a flight and go to Pakistan to meet J.D. Vance in person. So a lot has changed. I think a lot is still in the making. I am personally not very optimistic about the fate of these negotiations. I think the main issue today, again, one of the members of the negotiation team said that the key issue that has been the main obstacle in making peace sort of, coming to to a conclusion with the peace negotiations is the nuclear issue in Iran. And I think until the fate of the uranium, the enriched uranium in Iran under, miles and under the ground is not clarified and concluded, I don't think these peace negotiations will be established firmly. It might be shaky and it might continue, but any moment it can be broken with that, with an excuse of the enriched uranium still being within the reach of the regime. I think the most important concern, I already mentioned, and I finished with this, I think the most important concern now for the Iranian people is the end to the digital blackout. The internet has essentially become class-based because of what I told you, but also they are implementing new plans and sort of policies that seems to be extremely worrying in terms of the future of free internet access in Iran. It seems like they're trying to completely just destroy any possibility in the future for the population, Iranian people, to have free and equal access to internet. And I think that's a very dangerous development. Islamic Republic has realized over the past 16 years, particularly from 2009 so far, when the role of Twitter and Facebook back in 2009 was extremely important, and then Instagram added to that, and Twitter again back in 2022, and they learned very well and were equipped by what they needed to implement the total digital blackout, thanks to their Chinese and Russian fellows, and they've learned it. They've learned it, and they've done it with impunity in the past. In 2009, they shut down the internet for a week, and they killed over 1,500 people, unarmed protesters. In 2022, they did the same thing. They killed more than 600 protesters under digital blackout. And in the most recent round of protests, they killed thousands. And, no one can do anything about it, at least, to this day and to this moment. There were some Starlink importation to Iran between 2023 to 2025, but Starlink is extremely criminalized. If people are caught with Starlinks, they will be taken away and charged between 3 months to 3 years of prison for just having a Starlink device. And of course, that, as I mentioned, the inflation and the people are posting their receipts of going to a grocery store, comparing it to the last month. There is like 150% something, insane inflation that people can no longer even provide their basic needs for the family. So I'm sorry that I don't have anything positive to say. Maybe the only development that I can share recently was that, in the opposition, after, and this is the opposition in exile, after almost 16 years of Pahlavi and his team and his followers just jumping and manipulating and doing essentially what the Islamic Republic has been doing, which is silencing, trolling, threatening all other factions of opposition. We finally have come together, and by we I mean the Democratic Front, who believes in democracy and its true sense, pluralism and dialogue. So we recently had our first gathering in London in the month of March. And, the gathering included about 300 Iranian opposition figures in exile who were from all different factions of, and parties, from the left, Marxist communists, to liberal Democrats to Kurds and Baluchis, all the parties, the feminists, women and children rights activists, labor movement. So everyone was there, and it had its own problems, of course, and we did face the Pahlavi mob outside the building in the heart of London, and the police had to lock us up in the building. It's a complete disaster, the situation with Iranian opposition. But I think it was the first step towards hopefully something more meaningful, and the next meetings and events will be hopefully announced sometime in the next couple of weeks or months. I'll stop there. If there is any question, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you very much, Fatemeh. I very much appreciate that despite all this, you found the time and the emotional stability to come and talk about it. That's very much appreciated. Let's turn to Gadi. Yes, great to see you. Gadi, can you add and then we go in a joint Q&A.
Yes. Should I share? I have a little presentation for later.
Sure,
Should I do
Hannes will take care of that.
Yes, please. You can.
So I'll try. Just one moment. You know the drill. I think, let me just fix it. Yes, so the color stands more or less for the content of our presentation. I would like to thank you for the opportunity, and also to thank Imad and Shams for the presentation. What I thought I should do is not give you another report about human rights violation and cruelty, but try to do something that is more related to my perspective as activist and historian, and try to give you at least my understanding of what is going on. Not from the point of view of what is happening in Iran or Lebanon, but in terms of what I can see from my point of view. So my suggestion would be that we should distinguish, when we look at Israel's policy in the region, with the distinction between imperial and colonial, that is, between regional domination and between a different aspect, and that is the strictly colonial or settler colonial policies. So one is Israel's relationship with the states of the region. It could be Saudi Arabia, it could be Iran, it could be Syria at the moment. And very often the conflicts on that level, the large-scale wars or the relationship, enable a different sort of long-term war that Israel is waging far closer to home, primarily against Palestinians, but not only against Palestinians. And it's sometimes very difficult to take a look at both of them at the same time. My impression from watching the news in Europe is that everyone speaks about the war in Iran, and justly so. It is a horrendous criminal war, but the Palestinians are forgotten, that the Lebanese are largely forgotten, that the inhabitants of southern Syria are completely forgotten. So that moves from one scene of killing to another and finds it extremely difficult to think about all of them together. Now, I have little to say to add to the things that Professor Shams did about the situation in Iran, but I fully endorse the view of the people of the region being hostages, taken hostage by different dictatorship. But I would like to say something general about the realities that is now taking shape in the Middle East and that can be ignored because we are so fascinated by the facts, by the bits of information. And the larger picture, as I see it, is that after October 2023, there is one long war with interruptions, and that the Israeli regime is actually pursuing a consistent strategy in the region. That's the imperial aspect of establishing direct military rule over the region. This is unprecedented. What I mean is that Israel, no doubt in the past, had proxies in the region or fought against proxies of other regimes. It tried to use the Kurds in the 1960s. It had its own army of collaborators in South Lebanon in the 1980s and 1990s. But what is now happening is that Israel is establishing direct military rule over the region, primarily through its air force, which is now able and demonstrates its ability to bomb and to bring ruin in any part of the Middle East. So this is a war against Iran in part, but is also part of a larger strategy that changes basically the way we who live in the region are going to live in the future. There was cooperation, of course, between Israel and Arab regimes like Saudi Arabia or Egypt. But there is a difference between all these undercover or half-official forms of patronage or relationship and establishing direct military supremacy. And military supremacies, as you know, are demonstrated by killing as many people as possible and by proving that what could incur suffering on such proportions on everyone. It is unbelievable that the international community, whatever people think about Hamas or about Iran or about what have you, accepts such a huge change in terms of international relations while protesting against other attempts in the world to impose a new imperial world order. So, in other words, within the new world of empires that we now live in, a world which makes talk about human rights partly dated, what Israel pursuing is regional supremacy and its own imperial strategy. And whatever one thinks about the Islamic regime, this cannot be accepted. And I would like to say that even though Israel has huge military successes, which is understandable given the situation in Iran and American support, this joint war does not mean that the victory is durable. It's very difficult to imagine that the peoples of the region and even reactionary regimes like in Qatar or Saudi Arabia would live not simply with cooperation with Israel. This cooperation exists for a very long time, but they would accept Israeli domination of the region. This is hubris. This is imperial hubris that risks everyone's lives. That's at least one part of the picture, and I would like to focus on the other one. And the other one is partly to have a look at Lebanon, which we have, but also to look at Gaza, to look at the West Bank, and to look at southern Syria. And of course, we are talking here about war, and I'm not trying to burden you with images of atrocities, which if you're here to listen, I suppose you follow the news and you know where schools are being demolished, where children are being killed. I would like to explain why this is more than the usual another round of warfare. Imad mentioned old people speaking about 1982. I think I'm the older among the three of us, and I was already in military prison in 1981. But if you look at Israel in Lebanon, we are now facing the 7th invasion of Lebanon, of different scale, since 1978. 1978 was the first Israeli large-scale military operation that inaugurates the era of colonial wars in the region. It's always against the Palestinian. It's always, many often, with the peoples with whom Palestinians can find shelter. So now, by my reckoning, this is 1978, 1982, 1993, 1996, 2006, and 2024. And now we come to the 7th round. Now, in terms of numbers of refugees and destruction, there's no end to reciting the atrocities, but there is a difference. In none of the previous military operation, we had mass eviction of population on express order of the Israeli military. Of course, people fled South Lebanon time after time. It took years for the people of South Lebanon to go back to their homes in the late 1990s. But for the first time, Israel issues order of eviction to around 1 million people. Perhaps Imad can correct the assessment. That's not just a crime of war. This is a crime against humanity. This is a threat with ethnic cleansing. And when it comes to South Lebanon, Israel occupied South Lebanon again and again, and it destroyed villages. But what they are now doing, first in the area that immediately to the north of the Israeli border, is to turn South Lebanon into the second Gaza. That is to destroy one village after the other and to make the place uninhabitable. If this is allowed to take place, then no country in the West or elsewhere can claim that there is any minimal respect to people's rights and to human rights. Now, I'm not going to give you a lot of examples, but there is one that is especially important to me. Let me see if I manage to share it. Well, I can't. Very well. Yes, this is it. This is the report by the New York Times from April 1st. It has not been denied until now, and seems to be corroborated by other evidence. And all I need is to read simply what is being reported here. It says that Israeli officers in South Lebanon are assuring Christian and Druze communities. Imad talked about the inner divisions of Lebanese society, but Israeli officers are telling Druze and Lebanese communities that they could remain in the evacuation zone that is south of the Litani River, and they have pressed them to force out any Lebanese from neighboring Shiite Muslim communities who have sought refuge among them, while Israel bombards and flattens Shiite towns. Now, what officers are saying to people is that they should not be solidaric with their neighbors, and they are risking their lives. If they do, there's something that is the most basic human obligation: to give shelter to your neighbors of whatever religion or ethnic group they are. And I must be honest with you. Today in Israel is the day of the commemoration of the Holocaust. I owe my life to people who, in 1944, were brave enough, more than once, to give shelter to my mother. They risked their lives. We should be honest about the meaning of such a message given by an occupying army. It threatens people that if they would realize their basic human obligation towards their neighbors, they are risking their lives. This is a policy of selection. This is a policy that goes beyond, at least in my view, than other forms of cruelty. So my point is this, that while there is an imperial conflict or regional conflict with Iran, we have another strategy of expansion, but it's a colonial expansion in the sense that it's not just expansion, it's eviction, it's dispossession, and it might also lead to colonization. If you now look at the map of Palestine and Israel, you will see Israel expanding perhaps permanently into South Lebanon and threatening with ethnic cleansing. It has occupied part of southern Syria. And as you all know, it reduced the Gaza Strip to less than half, and actually perhaps 40% of its territory. And in the West Bank, we have a campaign, a large-scale campaign led by radical settlers, but with the complete support of the Israeli army that is actually seeking to evict Palestinian communities and perhaps even create the sense of crisis that would make people go. So the other part of the picture is not just atrocity and not just war. This is colonization. This is settler colonialism now being pursued under the aegis of the large-scale war in order to change permanently the map of Palestine, Israel, whatever you call it, the country that I love very much. With your permission, I'd like to focus for a moment on the West Bank, because this is where I have more first-hand knowledge. I have no first-hand knowledge of Lebanon and of course not of Gaza. I depend, as you all depend, on report in the media. But in the West Bank, I have knowledge that comes from Palestinian friends, from many Palestinian friends, and from Israeli activists who are actually performing their duty by joining Palestinian communities and trying to resist and report. So the impression very often in Europe, once one has any sort of one gives some attention to what is happening in the West Bank, is that terrible radical nationalist messianic settlers are going wild, and that their shock troops are very often kids, boys, 14, 16, 18 years old. And what I wish to show you with a few slides is that there is a large-scale strategy behind it, which is why we need not just enumerate a human rights violation, but speak about the politics that is changing the basic conditions. I hope you can see the map. This is more or less the West Bank as imagined in the interim agreement in Oslo in 1993. The blue is for the Palestinian urban settlements, the cities that are under direct Palestinian control. When you speak about the Palestinian Authority, be realistic and look at this map and realize that the Palestinian Authority controls imperfectly those tiny islands that you see on the map. And of course, what you don't see in the map are Israeli settlements. Now, this is one way of looking at the reality of the West Bank. But if you now focus on the latest decision by Israeli government of building new settlements, I hope you can have you can see the whole map in this way. You can see that dozens of new settlements are planned. Some of them are tiny, but if you consider the logic behind it, you might understand that the basic idea is cutting the West Bank into small slices. You might call them Bantustans, you might call them ghettos, but tiny slices that are completely isolated through the settlements. In the east, you can see how this region of the Jordan Valley is now colonized by new settlements. And you can see that some of the new settlements are cutting the West Bank on an east-west axis. And the same actually you can find if you look at those hundreds of daily clashes between settlers, armed settlers, and Palestinians. I'm not even counting the number of the dead. I'm not counting the number of children, of women, of families, but I'm trying to be as distant as I can, look at the numbers and the distribution of the acts by the settlers, and you see that they are trying to cut off the Palestinian by controlling the Jordan Valley, cutting the northern part of the West Bank north near Nablus. Most of the most terrible incidents, burning houses down, yes, shooting whole families in their homes, are happening in this region. There's another line a bit to the south of my axis where you find settlers working, and there's another one in the southern part of the West Bank in Masafer Yatta. The image of children being harassed and suffering from tear gas on the way to school is not just inhuman. It's part of a large-scale and organized attempt by the settlers to change the demography of the West Bank, to change the map of the West Bank, and to make life impossible for Palestinian. So this is a large-scale war. I'm now showing you again the map of the West Bank so that you have a vivid image. I don't have military sources, I'm just listening to the news. You might see how the future of the West Bank is going to look like. So it is not just islands of populated Palestinian islands, it's going to be further fragmented and to become unlivable. So this is the other project that is going on, and I don't think I can have much good news in terms of how things are happening, but let me just finish by saying that I'm not sure at all when it comes to the regional map that Israel can turn military victories into long-term political achievements, not at all. And that even though the situation with Palestinians, and I have not even said a word about the daily killing that is going on in Gaza, basically, I do not think that the Israeli regime is capable of crushing Palestinians and ending the Palestinian in terms of a political collective project, but that much of it depends on solidarity and on the question whether people would raise their voices and even try to take action. At least some of us Israelis who live in Israel depend on that solidarity, on forms of resistance and forms of international pressure for the very sake, for our own sake, for the cause of living with dignity and equality, especially with dignity, liberty, and equality in this country. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gadi. Your presentation is equally shocking and depressing like the one of Fatemeh. And I find it very difficult to enter immediately now into a Q&A. Let me say one thing in addition. It's not only about military dominance in the entire Middle East that the Israeli ultra-right, together with its so-called opposition, is doing one war after the other. According to the news of the last 2-3 weeks that I followed, it's about restructuring the entire economy. So it's more than, between parentheses, just power. It is owning the entire Middle East. And there I have a tiny little hope that countries or dynasties like Saudi Arabia will not play this game to the fullest, but will at least try to keep some of their economic power, and so that things are not that simple. And the other thing to say, of course, given what's going on in different countries in Europe, with the Yadan law in France this week, with the law in Italy about the anti-Semitic declaration of I've forgotten the abbreviation, but you will know that immediately, that declares any criticism of Israel as anti-Semitic, to sort of silence any kind of protest and resistance. This entire sort of Western bloc in the EU is immediately, directly, and horribly complicit. There's little one can say about that. It's not just Israel. Yeah, so it's something where I'm deeply concerned about, not only, but where I'm also deeply convinced that politicians in Europe know exactly what's going on. Yeah, and they use anti-Semitism to pretend that this is protection of friends like you. That makes it all more difficult. Fatemeh, are you back? That's great. I thought you were gone.
Yes,
you had
yes,
to go.
sorry. The meeting was next week. I made a mistake.
Wonderful for us. So let's start with the discussion, despite the fact that we are already a little late, but I think there's a lot of things one should ask about, one should talk about. So who wants to start?